All right, hello everyone. My name is Rachel Jean-Baptiste, Mercer and Bruce Goldman Professor at Feminist and Gender Sexuality Studies at Stanford, and I'd like to welcome you all, but obviously I just want to acknowledge that CESTA for organizing this, and I'm just kind of the porte-parole here. So welcome to the fifth session of CESTA's year-long Mellon-Sawyer Seminar, The Data That Divides Us, Recalibrating Data Methods for New Knowledge Across the Humanities. So this is a really important workshop for bringing up these really fundamental questions. And today's seminar is on recuperating forgotten narratives and considering all of the images lately about Haiti and this suspended state and lots of suffering that's going on. Since all the more important questions about what do you do with quote endangered archives and what is the kind of implications of digitization. So today's seminar is focusing on what happens to text when it's digitized and turned into data. What new possibilities open up with this type of textual data, what new narratives can be written about past and present sexual conditions, and what remains irretrievable. And it is such a pleasure to welcome Marlene Daut, here who we've corresponded but haven't yet met, who is a professor of French and African diaspora studies at Yale University, and is also a public intellectual in the ways that public intellectualism can be so impactful in terms of thinking about reaching beyond academia to kind of public spaces. So Marlene teaches courses in Anglophone and Francophone Caribbean, African American, and French colonial literary and historical studies, and is primarily a literary and intellectual historian of the Caribbean. She writes about the history of Haitian Revolution, literary cultures of the Greater Caribbean, and also racial politics and global media, as well as appears in film and television. So her books include Baron de Bastille and the Origins of Black Atlantic Humanism, Tropics of Haiti, Race and the Literary History of the Haitian Revolution in the Atlantic World, 1789 to 1865, as well as a book that Matt happens to have on the shelves right here called Awakening the Ashes, an Intellectual History of the Haitian Revolution, as well as a co-editor with several people in a volume called The Haitian Revolution, Fictions and Anthology, and is also has this wonderful website of digitized pamphlets and newspapers from Henri Christophe. So as a public scholar, her articles have appeared in the New York Times, The Nation's, Essence Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, Avidly, and can go on, and many peer-reviewed articles in well-known journals such as Small Act, Comparative Literature. And she's also the co-creator and the co-editor of the HNet Commons digital platform Haiti, with others, as well as an online bibliography. And we could go on and on and on of all your wonderful accomplishments. And it is such a pleasure to have you here at Stanford. So welcome.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to Giovanna Cesarani for inviting me, and Matt Randolph for being a respondent, and for this warm welcome. And so many of your faces are familiar to me because I remember from I think it was 2 different Zoom events maybe. So it's so nice to be here in person, my first time actually on the campus here at Stanford. So I'm going to begin by telling a little story, and then I'm going to pull back and I'll speak more extemporaneously, so I won't be kind of reading at you, but I will pass around some flyers for a project that I'm going to discuss, so you'll be able to see kind of where I'm going with I'm going back to an old project that is going to be transformed into a new project. I'll say it that way. Okay, so you were just talking about Napoleon, which is great because I'm going to start with Napoleon, as one does in this era. When we talk about recuperating forgotten narratives, someone who is not forgotten and is remembered in very particular ways. So to mark the bicentennial of the death of France's emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, you might recall that museums and cultural institutions across France dubbed 2021 the year of Napoleon. In his speech at an official ceremony in Paris on the 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death, May 5th, 1821, French President Emmanuel Macron acknowledged that commemorating Napoleon could be a complicated task due to the emperor's propagation of slavery. In July 1802, Bonaparte, as first consul of France, reinstated slavery on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, and that was 8 years after it had been abolished by the French Revolutionary government. That same year, of course, Bonaparte had passed a law allowing slavery to continue on the island of Martinique after it came under French possession, again, following the March 1802 Treaty of Amiens. While Macron did acknowledge that these acts constituted a great faute or offense, he also failed to mention Bonaparte's simultaneous, disastrous, and thankfully failed effort to restore slavery to the colony of Saint-Domingue, now independent Haiti. In late 1801, Bonaparte had sent his brother-in-law, Charles Victor Emmanuel Leclerc, with 30,000 French soldiers to the shores of Saint-Domingue to reinstate slavery. Arriving at the end of January 1802, this was the largest military expedition to ever set sail from France. Throughout the campaign, Bonaparte repeatedly authorized his generals to eliminate the majority of the adult Black population. And in April 1802, although it is not often discussed, he signed a law to reinstate the slave trade to the island. Leclerc and his army, which eventually comprised more than 60,000 soldiers, then proceeded to rain down upon the island's Black population a murderous and genocidal campaign. It included the use of floating gas chambers, hangings, drownings, and dog attacks. Yet in his Napoleon speech, Macron sidestepped any mention of this offensive war of extermination, those were Leclerc's words, which was directly authorized by Bonaparte, and the defensive Haitian War of Independence, which brought it to an end. Worse still, the French president followed his initial tepid condemnation of Napoleon with uncanny praise. Without him, the destiny of France would not have been the same. One loves Napoleon because his life has the allure of the possible. His life was an epiphany of freedom. But his life was certainly not an epiphany of freedom for the 500,000 captive Africans still alive on Saint-Domingue at the time the Haitian Revolution began in 1791, nor was it for the more than 8 million captive Africans who, in the words of Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Andrew S. Fleuron, were forced to leave their home continent for a life of brutal enslavement in plantations on the other side of the Atlantic. More than 1.3 million of those captives were forcibly transported to the French Caribbean colonies alone, Saint-Domingue, Martinique, Guadeloupe, along with several smaller French possessions, St. Lucia, Grenada, changing hands throughout the era. The vast majority of them, however, more than 900,000, reached Saint-Domingue. Despite the French president's attempt to obscure this history, his country exercised an enormous role, outsized even, in promulgating modern racism and white supremacy through the propagation of the Atlantic slave trade from the 17th to 19th centuries, and of course also through the colonization perpetuated into the 20th century in Africa, the Caribbean, and South Asia. The French do not typically teach France's history of colonization in schools. When Haiti and the Haitian Revolution are mentioned at all, for instance, it's thought of as a minor story, not la grande histoire, said Elizabeth Landy, a history professor in Martinique, to New Yorker journalist Lauren Z. Collins in 2020, and I highly recommend the article, The Hole in High School French History. Downplaying the effects of race and racism, and therefore slavery and colonialism, in the name of so-called Republican universalism is a time-worn tradition in France. Scholar Chelsea Stieber has referred to French efforts to deny the impact of ideas about race on French society as a pretzel logic. The French government forbids official maintenance of statistics based on race or ethnicity, which results in a form of false universalism or a colorblind ideology, whereby, in Stieber's words, racism cannot exist since the Republic does not acknowledge racial, religious, or ethnic identification. Another reason France's history in Haiti is not better known is because teaching the Haitian Revolution would require acknowledging that Haiti, rather than France, was the first country to define modern liberty as freedom from slavery. France's unwillingness to fully reckon with its violent past of slavery and colonialism is in fact what allows a French president to hold up a racist figure like Napoleon Bonaparte as an icon of freedom to be admired. It has also allowed members of the regular populace and the media in particular to wrongly declare that they were the first nation, in the words of one journalist from Le Monde, to recognize slavery as a crime against humanity. In July 2023, this journalist from Le Monde, which is of course France's most prominent and widely read newspaper, declared that in 2001, with the Loi Taubira, for the first time, a nation described the slave trade and slavery as crimes against humanity. In reality, Haiti was the first country in the world to not only permanently ban slavery and the slave trade in 1804, but to declare both crimes against humanity in 1807. Haiti, not France, and certainly not Bonaparte, was therefore the epiphany of freedom the world had been waiting for. Errors like the one reiterated by Le Monde's reportage persist because conventional accounts of the abolition of slavery in the Americas tend to falsely center ideas about human rights from the United States, Great Britain, and France. And this was starting to change a little bit, although I'm sad to say that things have shifted very differently in the opposite direction since 2001, which I'll get to in a moment. But at the Napoleon exhibit, which took place in Paris in 2021 and opened that spring, there was initially not supposed to be anything about slavery. But members of the populace in France, workers at the museum protested, and the creators of the exhibit decided to give the Foundation for the Memory of Slavery in France a small section. In this section was the late Marcel de Rigny on a video, Pierre Branda, several really, kind of high-profile scholars of slavery in France, narrating the history of the reinstatement of slavery on Guadeloupe, the campaign in Haiti and Saint-Domingue, and the law that permitted slavery to remain in Martinique. As you can see, this is my picture that I took up there. The room was packed. It was very, very tiny. It was obvious that it was an afterthought. It was stuffed into the corner. But what was really interesting to me was that there was just so much evidence that people wanted to actually learn and know more about this history. And every time people would sort of leave, the videos were on a loop, more people would pour in. And there was nobody, nowhere near the amount of people in the other rooms for things that might similarly be obscured. Some people, for example, don't know if Napoleon had a second wife, Marie-Louise of Parma, and they had a video on her. They had videos of other events, and those rooms were very, very sparsely populated. Having any mention of France's reinstatement of slavery at the exhibit was actually a huge step forward. These are the two consular documents, the law permitting slavery in colonies returned to France and the document reestablishing slavery. They had never been on public display in France before. They had never been a part of an exhibit or on a public display in this way. And so they're on the walls and there are explanations of them. But there's also a bit of incoherence there, just as with Macron's speech. On another wall in that same room is an image of Toussaint Louverture, a very famous one, and Le Rêve Américain. And it's not exactly clear what that dream is. The description goes on to talk about Louisiana and exploration and Toussaint Louverture. And recently, last spring, yesterday was the anniversary of Toussaint Louverture's death, a horrible death in a French prison called the Fort du Joux. And last spring, Macron didn't say anything this time because last spring he went to the Fort du Joux to give a big speech about Toussaint Louverture without ever saying why he was standing in that spot, because that's the spot where the French killed him, and without ever saying that the French were the ones who killed him. He said a great French patriot has died, all of these things. So the kind of incoherence continues, where there's acknowledgement and there's erasure at the same time. And that's what happened in the earlier Macron speech. And that's what's happening at this exhibit, because yes, there was the acknowledgement of slavery, but there wasn't anything about Napoleon's role in it. And in fact, when you walk throughout the exhibit, there are all these quotes, exoticizing quotes. Egypt is the most beautiful country in the world, but they don't put his very racist quotes on the wall. And I did wonder, what would it do to a visitor walking through? What kind of impression would they have of this person who's supposedly an epiphany of freedom if they had to read actually his very damning words, or if they had to see the law that reinstates the slave trade to Saint-Domingue? Because for a long time, French scholars in France would say, no, they weren't there to reinstate slavery. They were just there to get rid of Toussaint Louverture, as if that would be better. But the fact of the matter is that in April 1802, Napoleon did sign a law reinstating the slave trade. And in all his letters, he authorizes his generals to do whatever they can. This continued into the bookstore and exhibit, unfortunately. There were just a handful of books that had anything to do with slavery, the slave trade. Notably, one of the sort of biggest contradictions is this is a book by Claude Ribes about General Thomas Alexandre Dumas, father of the famous French novelist and playwright. And but Claude Ribes has a much more controversial book that was not there. And what's that book called? Le Crime de Napoléon, The Crime of Napoleon, which is about Napoleon's genocidal campaign in Haiti. And it caused big consternation in France when it came out. So that's not there. Again, nothing about Dessalines. Instead, we get Sudir Hazarising's biography, which was very new at the time, the French translation of it there. And so a lot of my projects, it's kind of seeing, you know, and I could show exhibits that happened in England about the Haitian Revolution, and I sort of collect, even though I work on the 18th and 19th centuries, I sort of collect information about how these events, capital events like the Haitian Revolution, or capital figures like Toussaint Louverture are portrayed to the public, and who gets to be portrayed and who doesn't get to be portrayed. For example, in a big exhibit they had on slavery in Paris this last fall, it was all centered on Toussaint Louverture as the representative, because of course Dessalines is the one who, and I'll show you some images in a second, gets repackaged as this sort of monster who unleashed his own reign of terror on French victims during Haiti's War of Independence. And so one of the things that I have focused on kind of throughout my research is how Haitians tell the story of their own revolution. And I wanted to make these newspapers that I've collected on this website that I hope you'll visit and that Rachel mentioned, because to me, they were scattered all over. Most Haitians in Haiti, therefore, couldn't access them. Only one of the more than 100 issues of the newspapers comes from Haiti. It's held by the Bibliothèque des Spiritaires in Port-au-Prince. The rest are either in England, United States, France, several in Italy, a few in Germany, some in the Netherlands. Denmark has about 5 issues, Ireland. They are literally actually scattered, 1 issue in Jamaica, all over, because news about the Haitian Revolution and Haitian independence and this independent state that Haitians were building circulated throughout the first 18th and 18th century, then the early 19th century, as people tried to understand this novel development, which these newspapers concerned, which is of course the creation of the Kingdom of Haiti, first the state of Haiti led by President Henri Christophe, and then later as king. And so these are the documents that you would see if you visit the site: the Gazette Officielle de l'État d'Haïti from the presidency of Christophe, the Gazette Royale from the kingdom, and then the Almanach Royal, which has the names of every single member of his government, administration, and nobility, hundreds of names and descriptions of their position, and all these very interesting insignia that has a legend that tells you what each of them mean and when they got their promotion, and very, very interesting, important, and crucial information, all of which was undercited because even a very well-funded researcher is going to have trouble going all over the world to just see 1 issue of a paper that's held in an Irish library. Oh, and 1 issue comes from Columbia, and a scholar named Henry Stoll from the University of Michigan got that for me because they were stonewalling us for a really long time. And finally, he just showed up there. They claimed that it was lost, it was burned, but we had the catalog record, and he found a very nice archivist who allowed him to take pictures of it. So that issue isn't up, that issue is in the process of being digitized, but it will be up soon, and they all contain very interesting and important information. But it was just to think about the amount of information that we don't have, because this is still just a small fragment of the archive that exists in terms of this particular newspaper. For example, we don't have a single issue from the year 1812. We only have a few from the last year, 1820, which of course we would love more to see what happens leading up to the king's demise. So there's still a lot of work to be done. This is just a kind of project page. The initial versions of these papers were transcribed by me and Denise Gross, my graduate research assistant at the Claremont Graduate University. And I like to say we did this mostly by hand. We tried to use Abby Finereader, but Abby Finereader at the time couldn't read the diacritics very well and made a big mess of our pages.
And so these are just some of just to give you an idea of what you can do. You can scroll through them if you wanted to. We have descriptions. The descriptions are in English. The papers are in French. The site will soon be trilingual, not the papers though, which I'll get to in a moment, but the site will be, the sort of paratextual materials will be available in English, French, and Haitian Creole once we get a new site design that can handle that. You can read the PDF version if you want to, or the transcribed version. So you could use a reader for accessibility reasons, and also you can highlight things so you can easily take notes. You can also annotate right on the site as well. And you can do search. That was a big deal for us to get a search button that could, search for names. One of the things we realized pretty quickly was how people were using the site, and people in Haiti were doing genealogical research on the site. And everybody who goes to archives knows that there's a large portion of people you run into there are doing genealogical research. And so, of course, that's what people would be able to use a site like this for, because the papers contain all these names, the almanacs contain all these names, and so people are using this digital archive the way that they use municipal archives and physical archives, which is to help complete their family trees and to find further information about people they're researching. This is just an image of these almanacs, which are just amazing documents for even the actual almanacs that they have in them that show the sunset and the sunrise, the tides, the moons, all the holidays, everything that you would expect in an almanac from the 19th century. They're based on the versions that the French had during their kingdom. You find similar things in England of the time period. But the fundamental question, so again, in collecting data about how people are using the site as well, so we say, is it text turns into data or data turns into text? They are kind of in this mutually informing relationship. But in collecting data about who's using the site and how they're using it, we asked ourselves, who is this for when we thought about translation? If we were to translate the papers, all of them, which would take a massive effort, into English, well, that would be for researchers on this side of the Atlantic largely. But given how the site was being used, we figured that most people here are using the site because they already have an interest in Haiti. And so if we put the apparatus in English, French, and Haitian Creole, that will sort of be its own study, in a way, its own presentation, but that the papers themselves, some of them have been translated into English in piecemeal fashion by students using the site. I partnered with various people at different universities who said, oh, I want my students to do a translation project and I want them to do something non-traditional and have translated portions. And so when the new site's ready, that will be available as well, but it's for teaching. And that brings me to the idea of different audiences. So when I say I go back to this was my first, it wasn't meant to be a digital humanities project. I'm not sure that I knew what that was when I created this site. But when I wrote Tropics of Haiti, I came across hundreds of fictions of the revolution from the 18th and 19th centuries alone. And I started collecting them into a bibliography. And the idea was, oh, I'm going to write a book about these fictions. And then I realized I would literally spend my entire life writing a book if I wrote a book about all of them. So I wanted to put the bibliography in the back of my book, but the publisher was like, you want to add 40 extra pages of bibliography to the back of your book that's 692 pages already? Like, no. But it was a happy accident because being able to put it on the web made it dynamic. I could add, as soon as I put it up, people said, oh, what about this one? What about that one? So instead of that kind of gotcha, oh, you forgot this, people were telling me, no, put this one on there. I know about this one. What do you think about that? And then it became the hunt of trying to go out and find it and be able to read it. And I'm still engaged in that. But the question of audiences, my initial idea was, okay, I was at the Graduate University of Claremont. Okay, what we're gonna do, students, is we're gonna get all these manuscripts and we're gonna put them on the site. But the novels, some of them were 5 volumes long. So this was gonna take an enormous effort to just bandwidth and have the space to put them on the site. But also around that time, I was contacted by some teachers from the San Bernardino County Public Schools. And they said, we want to teach these fictions. How can we teach these fictions? And I said, well, this is what we're planning to do. And she said, no, yeah, She said, no. Our students can't, even if the ones that are in English, they're not gonna read 5 volumes. Like, we need a presentation. We need something that they can, sink into. And so we shifted gears. Gregory Pierrot from the University of Connecticut, Stanford, and Marion Bohlleitner, who's Austrian. So that helped because a lot of these fictions are in German, and teaches at the University of Texas, El Paso. We spent 7 years developing the book that is Haitian Revolutionary Fictions. And it contains excerpts of more than 200 of these fictions, which is by no means exhaustive, because that book is 1,000 pages, and there were some conversations there, with the press, and it has almost 30 images. So that's the pivot to the new project. One of the things that we realized was there aren't good visual histories that are expansive of the Haitian Revolution from the 18th to 19th century. There are people who've written articles, like Susan Zantrop from the University of Chicago, about a very limited set of images in very particular contexts, but on the whole, and it's because it's a massive undertaking, many of those images were in the fictions. And so in the volume, these are some pages from the volume, some images that when you Google Haitian Revolution, for example, you're going to see the most famous images, the ones that are Getty images, the ones that are in archive.org, maybe even some of the ones that Google will, crawl for from Gallica, the Bibliothèque Nationale site. But some of these were in manuscripts for books that were never actually published, like this one, which has all these color plates that are very interesting. But you'll notice as I go through these images, they are also telling a story. So the books that they come in, the manuscripts they accompany are telling a story, but the images are also collectively telling a story. And the important thing about some of the images, I'm gonna skip ahead, is that even though now in some of the images I'll show you in a minute, you'll say, oh, I recognize those. Those are some of the most famous images of the Haitian Revolution. But that's because of the power of Google and the search and what you get shown. But actually in the 19th century, these images were far more popular because most of the fictions, the novels that are in the anthology, went into multiple editions and were translated into multiple languages and circulated across the world. So even though you wouldn't know The Winter in Dublin, one of the names of one of the 5-volume novels that deals with the Haitian Revolution, and yes, it's called A Winter in Dublin. Even though it's not a name to us now, in its era, people knew what it was. They were in circulating libraries. People purchased them, they got them, they read them, and they went into multiple editions. This is an image that was created for a review of a play called Les Massacres de Saint-Domingue, which was based on Victor Hugo's very famous novel, Boug-Jargal from 1826, one of the most repackaged, translated, multiple translations into Spanish, 3 different Spanish translations in the 19th century, multiple translations into English, 7 or 8 English translations into German, adaptations for the stage. This is a playbill from one of them. And again, all of this kind of imagery that accompanies these images. This is from William Edgar Easton's Dessalines, a dramatic tale from the late 19th century, illustrating the duel, a fictionalized duel. This didn't really actually happen between Dessalines and Rigaud. And so again, we started thinking about how the visuals are telling their own sort of fiction. They are, in fact, a part of the fictions of the Haitian Revolution. They are not separate. And one of the strongest pieces of evidence for that is that some of the poems in the volume were published in 1825, which is the year of the French indemnity. And they were celebrating King Charles X as, these were French poems, the true liberator of the Haitian people, which is again, massively incoherent because slavery still existed in France and would until 1848. But so he's a liberator, and they were accompanied by engravings, lithographs, images showing this is Charles X bestowing freedom on an African man in chains before him. So there was, again, all of this kind of storytelling that is happening alongside or sometimes separately. In contradistinction, these are some of the most famous images of the Haitian Revolution that if you Google this is what you will see a lot of times if you see articles written in the public sphere. These are a lot of the articles you see. They are also telling a story. These are from Marcus Rainsford's Black Empire of Haiti. But I started to wonder about the distortion effect of that, because a lot of what I see in the public sphere is using, again, the same images over and over again. Whereas in the 19th century, a book like this is a genre, and it's you can tell the sort of aim of the author by what's happening in it if you examine it. So there's lots of white people dead and on the ground and they're being chased by Black people, and there's lots of children in these kind of images. And so sometimes, it's interesting, people want to perform a sort of counter reading, but these were not meant to be celebratory images showing, Haitian freedom. These were meant to show white victimization. But actually what happened in the early days of the revolution, which is what this book talks about, is that it wasn't a time when Black people killed white people en masse. It was actually the opposite. When you read the journals of the first militia members who went to quell the insurrection, they'll say things like, they killed 10 of us today, but I killed 400 of them. I spread and sowed terror everywhere I go. That was the words of the Marquis de Rouvray, who ended up fleeing to Philadelphia with his family later after the revolution began in earnest. This is one of the most famous images that's on many articles. Every Jacobin article about Haiti has this image somewhere, which is the burning of Cap. The corresponding image is another one. It's also about the burning. But in the 19th century, these were the images that circulated most heavily in books. The Black Avenger, Gregory Pierrot, my co-author there, calls that the Black Avenger in Atlantic culture, and he has a version of, actually I think it's this one on the cover of his book. I'll come back to this in a second. This is one of the most famous images of the Haitian Revolution from the 19th century, even though to us now, we may not recognize that this is one of the most famous images. And so images like this gave us pause as well, because sometimes our students would say, but look, Toussaint looks so noble there. But if you read the book and you read the preface to the book, it's not about Toussaint being noble. It says the Negroes don't care if they reign over ashes, all they want to do is reign. And so that's Toussaint Louverture being proud to reign over the ashes, as the author has described. And again, you can tell by what the other individuals in the images are doing, what the ideology is to a certain extent, or what sort of emotion is supposed to be elicited in the reader. Again, so in the project, when we upload the images, each of them will have context about the book, the era, summarizing a little bit the book as well, but also analyzing the image to help viewers, and also because this is essentially for teaching, to help teachers to understand what they're seeing, because the visual culture of the Haitian Revolution actually does misrepresent the history to a large extent. And so in sort of having a proliferation of these images and collecting them and historicizing them, we also don't want to contribute to sort of reinforcing these narratives. So we have to have counter narratives, because these are, again, two of the most famous, and they are all about, sort of illustrating Black people in very, very violent positions. That's Dessalines, holding up a head. And that was a very, very famous image in the 19th century that circulated also, and is one of the ones that will come up if you Google Dessalines, for example. We did find examples of the opposite though, but they were just much less well known. This image here is from a book called Thérèse à Saint-Domingue, and it does illustrate sort of the violence that was perpetrated against the Black population as well. But correspondingly, it has a lot of sort of noble, you can be the sort of noble African slave if you're helping a white woman get to freedom and get to safety. And then much rarer, we did see images that attempted to show the suffering and sadness. These are two children, and they are crying because the little girl's mother has recently died. And so this is by no means an abolitionist text, but again, that sometimes the images were not necessarily corresponding all the way with what was being narrated in the text. We also hope, this will be more difficult, but to include more contemporary images where contemporary painters and artists have tried to sort of say, let's think differently about the visual culture of the revolution. So you see this one here about terror and fright and the sheer violence that was rained down upon the Black population, because it included people who were in rebellion and not in rebellion. So it wasn't just the freedom fighters. And then of course we have the celebratory images, some of which are more well-known. This is Dessalines waving the white from the flag, from Metz and Montpellier, both of these at UCLA Fowler Museum, and then the Cérémonie of Poix-Clément from André Normil. And so again, when in talking with the teachers, one of the things that I learned was, first, again, we asked who's it for, what's the audience going to be, but also, one of the teachers said, and this was a teacher from Louverture Cleary School, who said, we want to teach the Haitian Revolution, and we keep telling people we want them to teach the Haitian Revolution, but the teachers tell us they need materials. Because when they go to teach other capital events in world history, they have sometimes centuries worth of information about how to teach that event for different levels and what kinds of materials to incorporate. And so in just various ways, I and others have been working to try to create and develop materials for different age levels. So one is the companion site from the Haitian Atlantic. It's a story map I made. You can go through and you could kind of quickly go through, so you wouldn't necessarily need to teach the anthology, and you can have students do their own. They can map some of the events that happen in, not just books about the Haitian Revolution, but other books they're reading. The OER project, Haitian Revolution, talks about the history, talks about the literature. And then there is also recently, for the youngest ones, a Brain Pop video. Brain Pop is an educational company. They make kind of little short cartoons for kids, and that has been showed up, the earliest age in 2nd grade to the OER companion project has been shown to 4th graders quite successfully. And so even though something like Haitian Revolutionary Fictions is probably more appropriate, more for junior high, 6th grade and up, there are lots of more resources out there now to get the story into more and more hands, which is ultimately what we need to do. Thank you.
So the